Everyone, my name is Jordan Elliott, and I'm so excited to be here. Just a few years ago, I was in the same position as you all, looking for a job post-grad and hoping to find a way to continue to pour into my love for sports every day. So I played soccer at the University of California, Berkeley, go Bears. But after 3 soccer-related injuries and actually surgeries, I decided to hang up my cleats and join the corporate world. So I began my career in marketing, transitioned into PR pretty quickly, and now get to work on a handful of sports-related clients in my role at a PR agency. So I'm really excited to be here, especially because although there were transferable skills that I took from the field into the workplace, that transition wasn't always super easy or straightforward for me. So I'm really thankful for Handshake creating a space for us to have a conversation about that today. And I look forward to introducing you to today's panelists. So we have folks here who represent kind of both sides of the industry, both inside and outside of sports. So we're going to start off with some quick intros. Can you share a little bit more about your background, maybe what school, major, sport you played, if you played one, with us today? So we'll start with you, Katie.
Great. Thanks, Jordan. Thanks everyone for being here. Super excited to be on the panel and to chat with all of you. So yeah, Katie Kelly. I am the Senior Talent Acquisition Specialist at the Boston Red Sox for business operations. I went to Providence College. I majored in marketing, and I did not play a sport, but I am an avid fan. My husband and I have season tickets to the Providence men's basketball team. So we enjoyed going to a lot of games this year, but excited, like I said, to talk a little bit more about careers and working in sports.
Thanks. We'll kick it over to Tim.
Cool. Thanks, Jordan. Yeah, excited to be here and be speaking with all you guys. But yeah, I'm Tim Drakeley. I'm from a town called Woodbury, Connecticut. Originally, I went to a boarding school in Connecticut called Taft, where I played football, basketball, and baseball. And then, following my time at Taft, went to Bowdoin College, which is a liberal arts college up in Maine, a Division III school in the NESCAC league. But I played football at Bowdoin for 4 years, majored in government and legal studies and economics. And then after graduating Bowdoin, I joined AlphaSights, so back in July 2017, so coming up on almost 7 years at AlphaSights, and currently a VP on our client services team there.
Amazing. And Malia, round us out.
Hi, everyone. My name's Malia. I'm originally from a suburb of Minneapolis in Minnesota, and I went to the University of California, Berkeley, and had the pleasure of overlapping with Jordan for a few years. While she was on the soccer team, I was on the gymnastics team at Cal, so I was a student athlete there. And now I work for my hometown team of the Minnesota Vikings. I'm a video producer specializing in lifestyle content, so pretty much anything that isn't football. That's how I like to describe it. So yeah, I'm excited to be here.
So cool. Thank you all for sharing a little bit more about your past. Now, talking about our roles today, in 1 minute, if you could explain what your role is to like a 5th grader, what would that sound like? And so I'll kick us off. I work in PR, and if I had to explain my role in very simple terms, I would say that I help companies tell their really cool stories to the world. So I guess less than a minute, but I'll keep it short for that one. Maybe we'll go in the same circle. So I'll kick it back to Katie.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. So like I said before, Senior Talent Acquisition Specialist. So if I had to explain it in very simple terms, I help candidates get in the door here at the Red Sox. So in all different capacities, different jobs, whether it's, to help during a game or if it's more behind the scenes, kind of finding the right people to work here.
Cool. I'll use my full minute here because AlphaSights probably isn't as well known as the Vikings or the Red Sox, but I'll give some brief context on what AlphaSights is and then my role. But yeah, so AlphaSights, we play in, we call like the knowledge on demand or expert network services space. So we partner with consulting firms, PE firms, capital markets firms, and larger corporations. And whenever they have a knowledge gap in their research or any diligence process that they're going through, we'll connect them with experts or the right knowledge holders in that industry to help them make an informed decision. So we're in facilitating those interactions. So it's kind of a niche, but really interesting industry. And then, so like I said, I sit on the client services team. So I oversee one of our larger consulting clients that we partner with. And then my co-VP, who actually is also a student athlete, she played lacrosse at Richmond. We oversee an account of about 40 associates, essentially. So we're responsible for all things talent operations, from recruiting to interviewing to talent development, and then also setting the commercial strategy for our team as well. So kind of wear two hats on the talent side and the commercial side of things.
And then I mentioned it earlier, but I am a lifestyle content producer for the Vikings. So as simply put as possible, I ideate, shoot, edit, produce video content that doesn't have much to do with football. So it's very player focused, who they are off the field, who they are as people, what they're interested in. So that could be anything from music, food, fashion to philanthropy, family. The list kind of goes on. So yeah, that's what I do.
So cool. Thank you. So as Brenton mentioned at the start of the session, we're going to spend the first half really talking about career paths in professional sports. So we'll focus a little bit more on the experience that you, Katie, and Malia have had. And then we'll transition into some transferable skills for any former athletes who are in the room with us that you can take really into any industry and any role that you decide to pursue after graduation. So Katie and Malia, starting with you both, I'd love to ask kind of one big question to get us started. Do you think that you have to be a sports fan to work in professional sports? Maybe we'll start with you, Malia.
I think it depends. I would say in general, no. I, growing up, was not a huge NFL fan. And I kind of happened to get into the sports industry through my time at Cal. And like I said, was never a huge NFL fan. And even now, I am a fan of the Vikings and the Vikings players, but past that, I don't think I know too much about the NFL. So I would say no, but also like it's a grind, so you have to like what you're doing. So I'm sure Katie can speak on that with 162 games a year. But yeah, so it's kind of yes, kind of no, but mostly no.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think there's a difference, and I like what you said that like I think you don't have to be a fan, and you don't necessarily need to be a fan of the team that you're working for either. Originally, like, we love to bring in new perspectives and people from, all different backgrounds. I think a lot of what we've already been talking about is these like transferable skills. So I think if you have those, that's more of what we're focused on. We don't want to just hire the same person over and over and over again. We want to make sure that we're bringing in people from all different types of backgrounds. I think once you're kind of on the staff and working for the team, I think you certainly have to be clued in on what's kind of going on, knowing when there's homestands and when we're away and kind of, who the players are and things like that. But I don't think you have to be this like diehard fan in order to work in sports.
I love that. I find that that's actually a common thread, which I think people would be surprised about. But we're here because of a recent Handshake report, right? That showed pro sports orgs are hiring on Handshake across a myriad of skills, including media and marketing, tech and finance, retail, and more. So Katie, from the recruiting perspective, I'd love to know what kind of roles you're hiring for at the Red Sox. And in your experience, are there any roles that pro sports organizations are hiring for that you think people would be surprised about?
Yeah. So I'm really hiring for all different kinds of roles. We have seasonal roles, which are for obviously for when we're in season, part-time roles, full-time roles, and I'm really hiring for business operations, like I mentioned earlier. So it's more of like kind of what Malia was saying. It's not really like the work that the business operations does isn't necessarily impacting like what's happening on the field. We're more so kind of behind the scenes and ensuring that like the game does get going and that tickets have been sold and, you know, fans are having a good experience. So really any role that can kind of, you know, fit into that is what I'm hiring for. And I think, you know, what might surprise people, like, I mean, maybe it feels obvious, but we have like a finance team and an accounting team. So we are hiring accountants and folks that, you know, majored in finance and maybe have their CPA. Like those things are super important here still. You know, we do have to pay everyone. And I think like sometimes you're like, oh yeah, like that makes sense, but I never really thought about it. And I think even my role, I didn't know that something like this would exist at a sports team, and it does across all different leagues. So I think that was definitely surprising and exciting when, you know, looking for a new job.
Malia, what about you? Any exciting roles or surprising roles, I guess I should say?
Um, yeah, I mean, kind of like what Katie was saying, like I kind of always say if you want to work in sports, there's a job in sports, there's accounting, finance. I think when I came to the Vikings and came into the NFL, what I didn't realize is just how many different like avenues there are. Like some standouts in my mind is we have a full-time person dedicated to what's the title is like player and family programming, I believe. So she works heavily with the wives and significant others of all of our players. She puts on events for them to really like make sure that they're a community and feeling involved in the organization. We have a youth and flag football department dedicated to like putting on camps hosted by the Vikings and generating more you know, young girls in football. And then we also, at least at the Vikings, have a pretty big just team in general. We have like 4 people devoted to community relations, handful of sales, handful of graphic designers. My department that I'm in is almost 45 people of it's called Vikings Entertainment Network, and it's basically like social, digital media, video, audio, graphics, editorial, digital. I think I already said that, but like the list kind of goes on. So what's surprising to me is like, no matter what job you're in, you can do it for a pro sports team if you want. So
Love that. And speaking of working at professional sports teams, want to chat a little bit about the recruiting and application process. Malia, as someone who went through this relatively recently, having a few different internships at various professional sports orgs, and now with your role at the Vikings, can you share a little bit about what that interview process was like as an early career kind of professional in this space?
yeah, I mean, it obviously differs from team to team. The first team I worked with as an internship outside of college was the New Orleans Saints and Pelicans, and that was, if I remember correctly, like 1 or 2 phone interviews and then 1 or 2 video interviews. Whereas with the Vikings, it's a phone interview and then like a little project or like essay that you have to write, and then a group video interview. And then I think like manager or above actually gets flown out to the facility to do in-person interviews as well. So it's pretty extensive and takes a while, at least at the Vikings, to make sure that we're doing a good hire. So that's kind of like what the interview process was like. Like I said, it differs from team to team. Um, so yeah.
Anything maybe you wish you'd known like before going into those different processes with the different teams?
Um, I don't know about anything necessarily that like I wish I had known, but my advice to people interviewing, I always say just like be proud of what makes you different because that's why they're going to want to hire you. They don't want to hire, you know, a copy and paste of the same person over and over. So, in my interview processes, I really relied on the fact that I was a student athlete and that I grew up in Minnesota, but then moved to California and like got a lot of different perspectives living in the Bay Area. Um, And the fact that I'm like not a huge football fan, so that makes me more interested in the players and their stories off the field. So I would say don't ever try and like answer the way you think they want you to answer the question, because you really like want to be proud of what makes you authentically you.
Love that. And Katie, you sit on the other side of the interview table. Can you share a little bit about what the hiring process looks like at the Red Sox for interns and entry-level hires?
Yeah, for sure. Pretty similar to what Malia mentioned. Kind of depending on the team, it might be a little different. Like you might have a project in there at some point, depending on like what type of role this is. So maybe for something that's more like social media or photography, you might need to like show off, your work in previous, or they want you to kind of work on the fly of what they would need you to do in the actual role. But essentially, we're reviewing resumes, we're getting a lot of resumes. So something that we do kind of in between your typical like phone interview or Zoom interview, we use a platform called HireVue. And so it's a recorded interview. So we ask, let's say we send the HireVue to like 70 people. We're asking the same questions to those 70 people. And it's a really great way for us to, not try and avoid bias in our interview process. And we're asking all of our candidates the same questions, and kind of seeing how they can, like Malia said, bring your authentic self to each question. So from there, we kind of review those, and then we'll move into like maybe a Zoom interview or bringing someone in depending on what type of role it is. But I think also reiterating, Malia, it is a longer process for sure, just given the amount of applications that we receive. So I think like checking in with the recruiter or whoever you've been working with is like great. You should definitely do that. Just know that it might be a little bit more of a longer process depending on where they're at in their season, gearing up for the season or in the middle of it. It could be, longer based on that.
And as a follow-up, as someone who's, often at career fairs or a part of these processes, are there any common mistakes that you see candidates make while interviewing? And do you have any kind of like hot tips for people in the room who might be interested in a career at the Red Sox?
Yeah. I think so two parts. I think for like networking and career fairs, I see a lot of candidates just kind of come up to my table. Hi, what kind of jobs do you have available? And I'll be like, hello, what's your name? What are you interested in? Like, let's have a conversation here. Like, let's talk about, why you're kind of stopping by. I think a lot of students it's obviously it's nerve-wracking and meeting with someone you've never met before, and maybe you're super excited about an opportunity there. But having a conversation is going to leave a lasting impression with that person at the table. If you're just coming up and wanting them to kind of do all the work, it's going to be less, energizing for that recruiter or that person. So I always recommend kind of coming up with your elevator pitch, kind of saying who you are and why you're interested. I think it's just a great way to kind of start off a conversation. And I think with interviews and maybe even with like your application, I see, and I'm sure people see this across all different sports teams, but I see mistakes of like, I'm a really big XYZ fan. And while that's great, we're kind of assuming that a lot of the people that are applying are really big fans. And so that doesn't really, set you apart. So trying to avoid that when we can, I think, it is important to show that you're excited, but not letting that kind of be your selling point. I think you want to say, why you're interested in the actual role. We want people to be jazzed about, what the responsibilities are and, why you're interested in working in, finance or whatever it might be. So I think focusing a little bit more on that could be a good place to improve.
Awesome. Any tips for like the Red Sox in particular and your process there?
Yeah. I think when we're applying to jobs, it's really easy to just submit your resume 100 times because you just want to get your foot in the door. That's usually a red flag, at least here for like hiring managers or for me, because it doesn't really seem like I was saying before how like you really want this job, like you're kind of just like throwing your hat in the ring and being like, I'll take whatever sticks. I think although it takes more work, making different resumes for different roles is definitely a great way to stand out.
Love that. That's super helpful. One last question for the both of you. Do you have, and you kind of have already sprinkled in some advice and touched on this throughout your answers, but any other advice for both early career applicants, but also new hires in the professional sports world? Any tips you might give to a friend or someone who, is applying and wants to stand out in the process or on their first day on the job?
I'll backtrack a little to like more of the like what'll make you stand out. Obviously I'm a video producer, so I'm in the creative area, I guess. I always just tell people go create. I know over the pandemic, before I had any fancy cameras, I did like a 10-minute little documentary thing on like my grandma. And like I can use that as an experience and like just go create anything, because it doesn't have to be, if you're applying for an NFL team, your portfolio doesn't have to be all photos of football. Like it can be really anything, because those skills are transferable. So go create, and then also like explore different experiences. Like in college, I was doing like facilities, digital media, social media, video production, before I kind of landed on like, okay, I really want to do video production. And I would say, especially at the entry level in sports, you're gonna need to do a lot of different things. So having that experience, and then also being able to like rely on that experience. Like I'm a video producer now, but I can rely on my experience in social media to know kind of what will perform well. So don't shy away from, getting your feet dirty and doing all of the different experiences and creating as much as you can.
Love that.
Yeah, and I think just to jump in really quick on that too, on more of like a tactical standpoint when we think about like resumes, and I think something that recruiters will notice, we review lots of resumes, and resumes that stand out are the ones that have kind of used the job description and had their resume up right next to it and seen, what are some of the buzzwords that they're using in the job description, and how do I use those buzzwords to show like, hey, maybe I haven't worked in sports before, but I have done this, and kind of using those words to kind of showcase how you've done those things in a different industry or whatever it might be. Those buzzwords will really stand out. And I think recruiters, I think the stat is like recruiters spend 10 to 15 seconds on a resume and they're scanning quick. Like, so if you can use those words to kind of grab their attention, like that will really work.
Awesome. Well, thank you both. We're going to transition to switch gears and talk a little bit about how you can, use transferable skills as maybe a former athlete, current athlete. I know we have some of those on the call, and then translate those into the workplace. And we'll also kind of explain what your options are, what if you're still looking, what's out there, and sharing more. So we'll hear a little bit more from Tim. We want to first dig into how bringing an athlete's mindset to the workplace can lead to success in your career. So Tim, a recent Handshake report showed that many organizations, including AlphaSights, actively look to recruit student athletes for their entry-level roles. Can you talk a little bit about what makes this population so appealing in your line of work?
Yeah, definitely. A few things come to mind, and I can speak to AlphaSights specifically, but I think it's applicable to a lot of other work environments. But so at AlphaSights, it's like a super fast-paced and dynamic role. You're balancing a lot of different projects with competing priorities. You have goals that you need to hit daily, weekly, monthly. You're working in a team environment, interfacing with internal stakeholders and clients alike. And I think student athletes perform so well and are such an attractive candidate for a company like AlphaSights, but I think a lot of others too, is because they just have the intangibles that will set them up for success there. Excuse me. So like as an athlete, you've already managed a really demanding schedule. You've operated under pressure. I assuming take feedback and are super coachable. You're results oriented and can just work with different types of personalities and work ethics to accomplish a goal. And that's really, really valuable, I think, regardless of what corporate environment you're in. And I think the other thing too is just the leadership potential that stands out from student athlete candidates. And at AlphaSights, for example, you can scale into a management position within just 2 years at our company. And I think student athletes make that transition really seamlessly because presumably they've had leadership experience on their teams, whether they were the captain of the team or just a more senior member of the team. And yeah, I think that's really, really valuable experience. And that's part of the reason, at least at AlphaSights, why student athletes are so such an appealing candidate for us.
On that note, do you think there are any roles that student athletes are particularly well suited for that people on this call might want to look into today?
Yeah, so I was thinking about this a little bit. I don't know if there's necessarily like one role or one type of role that comes super top of mind. Honestly, I think this panel is probably indicative of that because we're all in very, very different fields. But again, I think just with the intangibles that student athletes bring, it makes them super adaptable. I will say, just from my experience at AlphaSights, I think being in like whether it's like a sales-ish or like commercially facing role could be a natural fit. Just because there's goals to work towards, you're constantly competing against yourself, and then also presumably the competition or some other company to like close a deal. So yeah, I guess maybe that is a natural fit, but also it all depends on your interests. But I think beauty of being a student athlete, you're kind of a jack of all trades to some degree.
Yeah, I'll open this question up to the floor, but any advice for identifying what kind of roles maybe you should be applying to? I mean, I think starting with identifying your strengths is probably a good start, but is there any other specific advice that you could kind of share with this group to help them understand which roles they might be better suited for?
Yeah, I can kick us off. One thought I had is just not like kind of pigeonholing yourself to one career path, which is I think something I went down at my school, Bowdoin. A lot of the student athletes went into like consulting or some sort of finance role, and I went down that route too, and quickly realized after some really tough brain teaser questions and super day interviews, this was not for me, and I didn't enjoy what I was getting into. And I think just leveraging your network to the fullest, especially the student athlete network, even outside of your school, I think you'll find that people are a lot more willing to help, and just like really learning as much as you can and kind of broadening your horizons. I know that's like a bit fluffy, but I think it is really valid.
I love it.
Yeah, I'll jump in super quick. I think just something that you said, Tim, I think people love to talk about themselves. So I think like networking and kind of reaching out on LinkedIn, like, and not reaching out to say, hey, I saw this job. Can you talk about it? How do I get this job? Kind of reaching out at any given time and saying, hey, I love to see what you do at AlphaSights. Can I talk to you about what your day-to-day is like and how you got here? Like, the people will respond to those messages. They know what it's like to kind of be in your shoes. So definitely take advantage, like Tim said, of your network.
Definitely.
Yep, I second everything that they're saying, especially with the reaching out to them on LinkedIn and just learning more about their jobs. I did that a lot my like junior and senior year of college, and had a lot of interesting conversations and learned a lot about, or at least reflected about, yeah, that's not for me. And oh, I could see myself doing that. So just kind of like learn as much as you can.
And it can be hard, right? None of this is easy. I remember when I first got to college, my mom asked me like, Jordan, what are you going to major in? You can't major in soccer because up until that point, that was my only interest. That was my only strength, or at least so I thought. So I think really just reflecting on your 4 years or however many years and kind of understanding what you liked, what you didn't like, maybe what classes or what skills you were stronger in will help you kind of set up for success for that next step.
And one other thought too, just on all things networking. I think a good piece of advice I got, which is really simple, because networking can be like a bit intimidating if you're kind of reaching out to someone cold. But I think the advice I got was just get comfortable being uncomfortable, and it goes a long way. And at the end of the day, it's just a conversation that's pretty harmless. So I don't know, simple, but good to keep top of mind.
For sure. So now we're going to chat about transitioning from life as a student athlete into the world of work. Probably my favorite question that I get to ask y'all today. So I'd love if you could share a little bit more about your background as an athlete and how that prepared you for your career path. Malia, I know you were a gymnast at Cal, of course. Do you use any of the lessons from your time in college as a student athlete in your day-to-day work today?
Oh yeah, 100%. I mean, I, from my perspective, like normal life it's a lot more like stressful and like anxiety and stuff. But like in terms of just like dealing with day-to-day life, it's a lot easier than it was in college. My schedule in college was get up at 6, treatment, workout, other workout, class all day, study all night, get home at like 11, then do it again the next day. And now, working in sports is not as routine. But like if it's not a game day, if it's just like a normal work day, it's, I get up at 8, go to work, home at like 4:30, 5 o'clock. So it's definitely different. But in terms of like how being an athlete prepared me, I feel like just hard work is so ingrained in athletes, from the very beginning. So it's like, I feel like I don't even know how to not like give it my all and work hard on what I'm doing. Um, and then also, I would be interested to hear if other people or other former athletes like also think this. But for me, I feel like I'm very more aware of my body and like my health. So it's like if I need a day off, I can like kind of almost like plan for it and be like, oh, I can feel myself getting like extra anxious or like super stressed. I'm gonna have to like, maybe next week take an afternoon off or something like that. And I feel like if it weren't for, having to listen to my body all those years in gymnastics, I don't know if I would have that skill now.
I love that. Tim, anything or first of all, do you think football prepared you for the work that you do today? And if so, are there any particular strengths or skills that you feel like you lean on?
Yeah, I definitely think it did. And I think one, I think it's just teaching me like the discipline of keeping like consistent habits, like having a routine, like staying productive. I think that's a really hard transition when whether you're an athlete or not, just going from college into like the real world, in terms of getting back into a routine to stay, healthy and productive. I think just obviously being a student athlete, your schedule is super demanding. So be able to manage your time effectively and stay organized to hit goals. And then I was also fortunate enough to be the captain of the team my senior year. So just learning how to like lead and influence people too. That's been super valuable. And, dealing with underperformers, calling out different attitude types, having tough conversations in a position where I'm now managing people in the workplace. That's been super helpful. And honestly, probably my most formative experiences. So as a captain and quarterback of my team, I kept the other team very, very happy. So I actually got benched my senior year. And that was really hard to like be an influential member of the team, but also like find a way to add value, still be a positive contributor and like try to get back on the field. And that's what Malia was saying with just trying to like always work hard and like, always kind of give it your all. I think that's where student athletes are like super valuable, is at least I see on people on my team. They're trying, okay, how can I add value if I'm not the main voice in the room? How can I kind of get on the field to be in that position? And they're just always a value add and like solution oriented. So I think that's a big thing that I learned too.
I love that. Yeah, just speaking from my experience as someone who played soccer, team sport, and I think every team or every sport has its like own unique value adds and skills that you kind of gain through them. But in soccer, it's very much a team sport. So something like communication, which is what I do full time, is something that you have to be really good at, right? In real time, in stressful moments on the field, thinking about things that aren't necessarily obvious, but are things that you use every day as a part of what you do at practice and in a game, I think is really important to think about as you get into the real world. One other thing I'll just add is like, I don't think there are many sports where like a goal in the 89th minute can change the entire game, right? You could go from being tied to winning or losing or, tying the game in the 89th minute. So for me, I think having perseverance and like determination and having that like long-term mindset of like, okay, there are going to be little hurdles throughout the game. There are going to be fouls. There are going to be this and that. But knowing that at any point you can kind of one little change in your line of work, whether it's in a project or a relationship with a coworker, can make a huge like step forward or step back. So just knowing that and kind of using that like real life game analogy in the workplace, those can be helpful, really making it, taking it back to your sport sometimes for me when I have challenges in the workplace is so, so valuable because that's what we've known and loved, right, for all the years leading up to this. But speaking of challenges, it's no surprise that athletes face various hurdles throughout their career. So want to chat about specifically for student athletes who have struggled to build professional experience during their time in college due to the demands of traveling, games, and practice schedules. So Katie, we'll start with you. Do you have any insight here from the talent acquisition perspective? Like any tips on how people should build their resumes if they maybe haven't had the opportunity to hold a traditional internship or job during their, years in college as a student athlete?
Yeah, for sure. I think also just jumping back really quickly when you all were talking about the adversity that you faced and how you use that maybe in your day to day, I also think it's a really great thing to draw from when you're in an interview process. A lot of the times you'll get asked that question, like, when have you faced adversity and, how did you deal with it? And I think like Tim just talking about like how you were, a captain and then maybe didn't spend as much time on the field senior year, like that's adversity for sure. And so I think being able to use that and say, yeah, I learned from it and I kind of put the team before myself. And like, that is something that will really showcase great teamwork. And, your interviewers will really appreciate that. So keep that in mind when you're thinking about, how you face adversity maybe in your life and in an interview process. I think, I think everyone understands being an athlete is a full-time job. And I think putting that in your resume, like make sure you're showing like, when you put an internship, you're putting 5 to 6 bullets of like, here's what I do day to day in my internship. Like if you're the captain, you're running practices, you're managing your caseload and your workload on top of all the scheduling and practices and travel, like put that on your resume. That's important. And I think like, it's obviously something that maybe to me, like that would be obvious to me, just like working in sports. And I know that we get a lot of athletes. So like, I'm like, yeah, of course, like they were super busy. They were an athlete. Like they have so much going on. But make sure you're emphasizing that and be proud of the things that you've done, whether it's like winning an award for your team or anything like that. So definitely be proud of that. It's no small feat for sure. So I think that's a great way to kind of use, what you do during the school year and you're on your team. And I think maybe during the summer or during your off periods, whether maybe you're getting a summer job or things like that. That's a great way to show that like, hey, I'm off and I want to be able to relax, but I do have this part-time job. I'm still picking up stuff to do when I am less busy.
Tim, any advice? I think we were both soccer and football or fall sports. So summer was like main training period heading into the school year. Any advice on maybe how to navigate building up a resume?
Yeah, well, first going back again to the dealing with adversity point, that story I just told was definitely a big one that I milked in my interviews. Even my boss who hired me is still my boss to this day, brings it up as like one of the main things he remembers and was impressed by. So it's tough that I have to keep remembering that time because it was difficult, but very, very valuable. But yeah, jumping off what Katie was saying, my biggest piece of advice here is just not to sell yourself short. I think if it's not clear already, being a student athlete, it's like at the collegiate level is really, really impressive. You're a really great candidate. And yeah, I think just having like a really good story ready to go is really, really important. And, a good mentor of mine, when I was chatting with him, I was sometimes insecure because I played Division III football. My team wasn't all that good, but he's like, you have to remember you took a lot more snaps and reps than most people in like applying to jobs have ever done. And there's a lot that goes into that. So similar to what Katie was saying, just spell that out. And I think practice going through kind of selling yourself and the experience there, because even though it might not be like work or professional experience, again, hopefully it's been made clear, but there's a lot of intangibles that really translate. And I think any job can be taught. And so I think a lot of folks that are recruiting are just looking for, people they want to work with and are going to add value and try to get better.
Love that. Thank you both. So moving into our next question, just wanted to know if there are, and we've kind of touched on this, so If there's nothing specific to add, that's okay. But are there any skills from your sport that you wish you would have been like better coached on to translate professionally? And are there any resources that you wish you'd had to help you adapt? Millie, I see you thinking. Do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, no, that's a good one because I feel like we're kind of like what Tim and Katie were saying, we're almost trained to, you know, professionally like sell ourselves and all that we do as student athletes. So it's like thinking about like, oh, like where should I have like gotten a little bit more? Um, for me, I would say in gymnastics, um, it's a team sport in college in that like everyone is working towards the same goal, but you can really only control like what you're doing and you can only like you have to control yourself and you can only control what you can control. And think a hard shift for me into the professional world was not what am I trying to say here? Like basically it was a very individual sport and I was always focused on like what I can do to be the best and working in any type of job, it's more of a team and collaborative effort. So it's like no matter how hard I work or how well I do, like I do have to work with other people. And I feel like I could have developed while I was a student athlete more skills as to like, okay, you're different from me, you view things differently, but how can I inspire you to like work towards the same goal together? And I don't know, maybe I was just really lucky in that like my team in college, we were always really just like in sync on the same page as to working really hard towards a goal. But yeah, that's like the biggest transition for me is like dealing with a lot of different personalities and like different definitions of hard work. And getting all towards one goal.
Agreed, for sure. Tim, anything to add here? Any resources you think would have helped you adapt?
Yeah, I don't know about resources or maybe specific skills to my sport, but I think something I wish I focused on a lot more and maybe was pushed to do this more. We've talked about it a lot already, but just like networking and networking really effectively, and building connections. And I think building off what Katie was mentioning about like the career fair of like, okay, can you do your homework, come prepared with a few thoughtful questions, think critically about like what you eventually want to get into and how this role might play into that, just to have a really constructive conversation. And I wish I did that a lot, while I was still a student athlete. And I think that translates into even once you get a job, like so much of like kind of climbing the corporate ladder is being able to sell yourself, your experience, network with people, build connections. And I'm envious of people that put more of an onus on that earlier on in their career. Because I think, you're only as good as your network to some degree. So I think it really pays dividends even after you get a job.
I'll second that. I think networking with former student athletes who are in the workplace, who maybe you could see yourself doing their role in the future is so important. I'm lucky enough, Cal Soccer has a really strong alumni network. So I got to connect with a lot of former soccer players who, were now nurses and in the marketing field, teachers. Like I really got to kind of see what I could be in a sense and what they were excelling at as former soccer players. So any chance that I think you get to connect with people who were formerly in the same position as you is so, so valuable. But speaking of teams, I want to chat about the workplace and how finding the right match for you can sometimes be a little bit challenging. So we'll get straight to the red flags. Are there any red flags or green flags you think student athletes should look out for while they're, going through the job search process? And I'll open the floor for anyone to kind of give their input here.
I I'm sure everyone on this has heard this before, but in the interview process, you are also interviewing them to
Mm.
see if you want to work there. So like if you're in an interview and, Bob is interviewing me and I'm like, I don't like Bob's vibe. Like, listen to that. And like trust your gut. I would also say ask questions. I'll briefly say I worked at a job for about 3.5 months before I decided to leave because it was not a good fit. And in reflecting on that time and specifically the interview process, I was kicking myself because I did not ask enough questions. I just kind of like assumed that like things were good and this is what I would be doing and blah, 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 blah. So, like, make sure you really understand what you are getting into. Um, and like I said, just like be aware of the vibes, especially if it's like a group interview. I was that job that I was at for a very short amount of time. I was talking to my mom and she was like, "Yeah, I think she was in the room while I was doing an interview." It's beside the point. But I asked like what was their favorite part about working at this place. And this would literally happen like last week. And my mom was like, yeah, I noticed that they all said they really liked the weather. And that like kind of concerned me, but I was like blind and didn't like listen to that. Um, so I would just say like be analytical of the vibes.
I love it. Katie, anything from your perspective? Anything that maybe from inside, the building?
Yeah, I honestly like I was somehow gonna try and type to Malia, but like no notes. Like I think that yes, like you are interviewing the company as well. Like ask questions. Like I think not only does it show your keen interest in the role to like me, but you're helping out yourself. Like this is your life and your job, especially if you're like picking up and moving and making this really big decision. Like ask questions. And I think like listen to your gut too, like Malia said, like I completely I agree with all of the things that she said. So I think that's really important.
Yeah, I'll quickly just piggybacking off that. I think yeah, like doing your homework on the company and like going off the vibes. I think that's 100% true. And I think role alignment is so important. I think a lot of times like AlphaSights, that's something we're looking out for. Like, has this person done their homework? Do they know what they're getting into? And is this the right next best step for them? Or is it just a step that might not lead to where they want to go? And I think that's where folks who ultimately don't do as well as they're getting into an environment where they haven't done their homework, they don't understand what they're getting into, and probably don't enjoy the role as much. And then the only other thing, just in terms of like interviewing, like a red flag, I think at the end, obviously, I think just having like thoughtful questions like ready to go. I think everyone asks, and you should ask, like, what's the culture like? What's your favorite part, least favorite part? But I feel like there's 5 questions that I get from like everyone. But I think the candidates that really stick out have clearly networked, clearly done their homework on, is the company growing? If so, how so? Like, what's the competitive landscape like? There's just like kind of a step beyond the surface level, which I think which goes a long way.
Amazing. Thank you all so much for all the insightful answers you've provided today. We're not done yet. We're just going to get into some audience Q&A. So thank you for everyone on the call that submitted a question. Some are targeted to specific panelists. Some are open for the group. So without further ado, we already spoke a little bit about networking online and getting comfortable being uncomfortable. But someone in the room would love to learn how you networked for your current position. And actually, I'd love to kick us off just by saying, like, you never know the connections that you make in the past and how they're going to influence your future. The job that I have now, I got not because, but I was introduced to the agency because I built a mentee-mentor relationship with one of the co-founders of the agency. I would meet with her just every few months. I looked up to her and would ask her questions about, what building an agency was like, the projects that they were working on. And then when the time came and a role opened up on her team, I was one of the first people that she thought of to extend the invite to interview for it, right? So just you never know, I think, the connections that you are making maybe from 3 years ago and how they're going to influence your future. But Tim, want to I think you spoke on this a little bit. I want to shoot it back to you.
Well, yeah, I think that's a great point. And transparently, how I got the AlphaSights job, I was networking with like anyone and everyone. And around the same time, I was thinking about getting into like a finance type role. I chatted with someone, and I think because I had thought critically about what I wanted to get into and what I thought I valued in a job, he was actually the one that introduced me to someone at AlphaSights, thinking, "Hey, this might be an even better fit." So you never know what any conversation can lead to. And if I never had that initial conversation, I might not be in the position I'm in now. And then on the actual like putting yourself out there to network, something that I did personally was to hold myself accountable, was actually set a goal of how many people I'd reach out to in a week. I know it sounds super simple, but I think it's one of those things that you can quickly rationalize not doing, or just like put to the wayside. But I think staying super disciplined there, because like I just said, you'll never know what a connection to lead to. So I never turned down a conversation.
Amazing. This one's a little bit more targeted. It's for Malia. So the person said, I am a student who will be working in an entry-level position this upcoming season for an MLB team. What can I do to network myself and connect myself with higher ups in the organization?
First of all, I would say that's awesome. Both the job and just having the goal of connecting with the higher ups. I would recommend, like, you have access to their email, just email them, introduce yourself, and say, I would love to, have a conversation with you and learn more about what you are doing, your goals for the company, what I can do to support those goals for the company, for the MLB team. And just like touch base with them. I know at the Vikings facility, like I see our COO and CMO and our C-suite like on a regular basis. Because they're just in the cafeteria with us. They're walking down the hallway. So if that is the situation where you're at the MLB team, like if it's a situation where like you guys are all kind of in the same area, don't hesitate to, if you see them walking by, walk with them to wherever they're going and just quick introduce yourself, say hi. And remember that they're just people, like they have high positions, if you will, but like at the end of the day, they're just people. So if you can find something to connect with them on, they're gonna remember you.
Love that. This next question is really targeted to Katie, and I love it because it gets into kind of the unspoken rules of the corporate world that I feel like all of us are familiar with, but don't really learn until we're on the job. So this person asks, how important is it to send a thank you letter to employers after being interviewed? And maybe Tim, you can piggyback on like sending a thank you or follow-ups when you're doing this like cold networking that you've been talking about.
Yeah, I'd say very important. You should always do it. There's really no reason to not. I think it's not going to be a nuisance. I think, there's situations where two candidates are the finalists and, one sent a thank you note and the other one didn't. And it just speaks to maybe who you are as a person. You're respecting the fact that someone took a lot of time out of their day to meet with you. And it just can't hurt. It's so easy to write an email, like takes about 5 minutes out of your day. So I always recommend doing it.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think it's also nice just to show that you're actually like engaged in the interview, perhaps even if you have to go through some sort of case or something, you got feedback, like just referencing like what you enjoyed about it specifically, or like, I don't know, it's showing that you're like really, engaged in the conversation goes a long way. And then super simple, but you wouldn't believe the amount of people that actually like misspell my name or misspell AlphaSights name, or the grammar's off. And I don't think it's like a deal breaker by any means, but I think it is just like something that a mistake that shouldn't be made and something to be mindful of.
Yeah, people call me Kelly all the time.
So there have been a few questions about breaking into sports, coming from a different industry, or breaking into sports with no prior sports experience. So curious if anyone here has advice on how to, for someone who's interested in a career in sports, but doesn't know where to start. Maybe they had experience in fashion merchandising or healthcare, or just, you know, not at all, maybe for the student athletes on our call.
I think like I can speak from my personal experience. I worked in management consulting, and I was a recruiter there. So I was a campus recruiter there. And then, you know, this job just happened to pop up on my LinkedIn. I applied, and I think this circles back to what we were talking about at the very beginning of the call, but those transferable skills really are important, and I think will bring a different perspective to the team. If we're just hiring the same person who does the same job, just at a different team, we're not going to learn anything. We're not going to do anything new. We're not going to try new things. We're not going to innovate because we're kind of doing the same thing over and over again. So I think when I see a resume that's like in fashion or in healthcare, and I see like, oh, you know, maybe they've done sales somewhere else, you know, they're working with the same things that we work with here. It's just in sports. And that's okay. I think that's great. So I think it shouldn't really take away, you know, from any application really.
Amazing. All right, well then we'll just end on a fun question here, and that is, I think let's have everybody in the room answer, and that is, if you could try out any other job at your organization, what would it be and why?
CEO. Good.
Yeah.
Yeah, straight to the top. No, I can kick us off. Yeah, I think, well, it's a bit AlphaSights specific, but you know, we're very much a fast growing company, and still a pretty young company too, but starting to invest a lot more on like the product side, which is really neat and something I never got into, but I don't know, maybe something to get into in the future. And again, hopefully network with some folks internally. But I think my job so far has been very much talent focused, and then more on like the sales front. So going into the back end of the business a bit more on the tech side, I guess would be cool.
I would either want to do community relations, or like just operations in general. CR, because I think the impact you can have is so incredible, and getting to even like when I'm going to film community events, I just love seeing all the fans like interacting with the players and just seeing the impact it can make. So I think that would be incredible to like have firsthand on that. And then operations, I just think is cool because they just like they do a lot of things and like get stuff done, and it's kind of badass, and I like that. So
I think here, I think probably at the Vikings too, but we have a fan services team. And they run point on all of our pregame. So we have ceremonies, you know, with like our national anthem, and we have our first pitch, and we're honoring certain people, and maybe we're doing hats off for heroes. Like they walk around with these big headsets, and they've got these like iPads that they can write messages to each other, and they're almost like walkie-talking to make sure that like people are coming out. They've got like a minute-to-minute schedule, and it's so awesome to kind of see them in action, and then also be in the stands and be like, this is getting put on literally live, and I know who's doing it. So I think it would be cool to do something like that. Maybe once. I think like it's a little bit stressful, but I think it would be cool to do that once or twice.
Maybe some of these orgs can do like a career swap for a day
Yeah.
after they hear what everyone else wants to do. I think I'm with Malia. I think operations is really cool. My agency is really small. There's only about 10 of us. So I'd be interested to see like how everything works on the back end, and how, you know, my co-founders just help us run, you know, day to day. But thank you all so much for providing all your insights today. I'm going to turn it over to Brenton, who will wrap us up.
Hi, thank you all so much. This was such an incredible panel. I feel like I learned a ton. And I just want to thank everybody here for joining us. Everybody feel free to join me in the Q&A box, thanking our speakers for sharing your insights and your experience. As a quick reminder, if you all have a moment, please take the 30 seconds to fill out our feedback survey in the chat so that Handshake can continue to bring you awesome events in the future. And you can follow us on Instagram at Join Handshake for more event announcements like this one. We have a lot coming up in the next couple of months, and you can check those out on our socials. But with that said, thank you so much to our panelists for your time and energy and input. And that's going to be it for us today. So everybody have an amazing rest of your week. Thanks so much.